So welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to today's event, Information Governance is Good Business. Your first presenter is Chris Dale. Chris, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I'm Chris Dale from the UK-based e-disclosure information project. My role is carrying information between courts and lawyers and clients and providers of e-discovery software and services. And doing webinars like this is very much part of that role. I have with me Johannes Scholtes, who's Chairman and Chief Strategy Officer of ZyLAB. Jan, can you tell us very briefly a bit about yourself?
Yes, hello, good afternoon. Very happy to be here. Thank you, Chris. My role at ZyLAB is indeed that of Chief Strategy Officer and Chairman. I'm also holding the extraordinary chair for text mining of the Department of Knowledge Engineering from the University of Maastricht. And I've been active in this field quite some time. So that's it for me. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks very much. Our agenda is set out very briefly here. Data conceals risk, it says. A lot of the talk that one hears about the whole business of e-discovery and information management and information governance is all about risk, how you can reduce risk, how you can anticipate risk, and clearly that's important. Risk, however, buries value, as we put it here. There's a different way of looking at the risk, and to say that its obverse can be some benefits. We don't just have to talk about warnings and sanctions and danger. We can look, and perhaps ought to look more closely at the value that's buried in that data. Some of that value is what you might call the obverse of the risks. If a risk is failure to find stuff quickly because a regulator wants it or you need it for litigation, then the value lies in the opposite, in being able to react quickly and to make strategic decisions because you've found the right information. Some of that value is a straight cash saving. If you were to add up the money spent on discovery or reacting to a regulator over a year and say, well, we could have started with a much smaller pile. We could have legitimately reduced that pile. Then you would have saved a lot of money and possibly saved it multiple times. And the third element of value is hard business asset. There's data in there that you could use to win pitches, to get jobs done faster with fewer resources, and quicker routes to getting a job done and getting it billed. So we're going to look at the risk aspects, but we're also going to try and look behind that and how one might uncover value. We're going to look at the label information governance, which is much used at the moment, and we'll use a definition and some other ideas that have come from the Information Governance Initiative. And when I've done that, I'll pass it over to Johannes Scholtes, who'll talk about the technology that's available, and he'll give us some case studies and some things that you may not have thought of when you see the label information governance. If one comes back to what I said about some value being the corollary of the risk, we can see some examples on the slide here. Litigation, you have a duty. The court rules require you to disclose some stuff. But the benefit is that if you do that, and if you do it promptly and you do it well, you can assess your prospects and your costs. In regulation, there is a duty to react to regulatory requests. But if you do that, the value lies firstly in looking good vis-a-vis the regulator, but also in preparing for regulatory events, checking and enforcing the compliance processes that you've got. And for that, again, having too much data is unhelpful. And thirdly, your own investigations. It's not just needing to investigate actual problems as they arise, but there's also the need to identify preemptively the problems that you might have. And there again, having too much data is less than helpful. If we look a bit more closely at each of those, litigation, and I'm focusing here a bit on the UK rules, but the principles are the same pretty well everywhere. You have a duty under the rules to, certainly under the UK rules, to say what is the scope of your potential disclosure? What method are you going to use? How are you going to set about it? What are the costs going to be? In some cases, many cases, you have to prepare a formal budget for the court, and you have to work out and agree with the other side in the court what the most proportionate course is. Well, that's specific perhaps to the UK in some ways, but most jurisdictions have something similar. The more important thing, I think, is that clients expect this in any jurisdiction. Why should litigation be treated any differently from any other project for which they expect all those things, the scope and the method and the costs, to be assessed? It's easier to do that with well-ordered data. It's expensive, jolly expensive in some cases, to react to one of these litigation events by getting your lawyers to do it at their rates when you might have done it as part of the business process with time in hand ahead of it, particularly if it becomes particularly expensive if this is a recurring obligation, something that turns up quite often.
Yeah, and it can also be very disrupting. That's also...
Yep.
And a lot of people, if you allow me, Chris, just for a second, this is actually also related to the business. A lot of people often don't realize that if they're involved in such a panic, hurry type of project, it distracts them tremendously from their daily business. And at the end of the day, it will hurt your top line and your revenue.
Absolutely, it will. So there's all that, as well as the strategic and the tactical reasons why you need to be on top of it. It's a puzzle to me how few companies actually know where their data is, what they've got, and what they do in the event of one of these events that we're talking about here. If we move on to regulatory requests, their timescales can make litigation look positively leisurely. You might get a written request from a regulator. You might get even worse, a dawn raid. We learned yesterday that Tesco's is under investigation by the Serious Fraud Office. All these events require people to start leaping about and getting back through the evidence as fast as possible, and the evidence lies in all this data. One knows that a regulator knows something. He wouldn't be troubling himself and you if he didn't. But what does he know? How big is this problem that you're facing? It's worse than litigation, because at least in litigation you have some codified issues and you know what it is that the outer scope is of your subject. You don't have that pleasure with a regulatory request. And it's best in many ways to start finding stuff before the regulator does. And that same point recurs, doesn't it? The bigger the pile, the harder and more expensive it is to find anything.
Yeah, and then here too, there's absolutely a link to your business, because if you have been investigated by a regulator and you have found guilty and you've not been able to get completely off the hook or to settle it, then it could very well be that you're also not allowed to participate in any future tenders or requests for proposals in a certain market segment. You know, one of the famous RFI questions is, have you ever been investigated for antitrust? Were you found guilty? And believe me, if you have to say yes, then there's a lot of business that you miss.
Yeah, as Tesco's is finding out right now. Shareholders tend to get upset, and it can get rather personal for the directors and those who should have been able to do something. That all goes to the question, could you have anticipated this problem? And that in turn feeds back into a number of things. But amongst the things it feeds back into is, do you know what information you've got? Do you know what data you're keeping? Can you find things preemptively as well as in response to a demand of some kind? The third element of risk, whilst we're dealing with this risk side of things, is internal investigations, where you think somebody's stealing your intellectual property, there's some financial wrongdoing going on, whatever it may be, a departing staff, departing department, are they taking customer lists? These are everyday occurrences, they're not rare things. And how do you find out? How do you get quickly to identifying what's been stolen, for example, if you don't know what you've got? All of which is part of an argument for control and management of what you've got. It goes further than that. Have you got staff who are bullying people? Are they acting in breach of company policies perhaps imposed by regulators? Are you getting statutory requests, the much overlooked subject access requests, which cause an immense amount of difficulty? Are you coming across those, Jan?
Yeah, no, this is something which is now happening in the UK, but this will be soon a problem that everybody in Europe will have to deal with as of the new European regulations. And again, if I can add here too, we've seen clients where intellectual property such as roadmaps were leaked by employees to their competitors, and then they lost business because they were competing against themselves basically. And so this is all. It's not just the investigation, cost of investigation. This is all like really, at the end of the day, really hurting your top line.
And it's not just big companies. Clearly, it affects big companies, but you don't have to be an enormous company to start suffering from things like this and not being able to find the data that you need.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
What is information governance? It's the buzzword of the year in some ways, and it's worth trying to put a definition around it. There's an enterprise called the Information Governance Initiative, which is seeking to do just that. ZyLAB is a charter supporter of it. And the IGI has come up with the definition that most people seem to agree on, that is shown on the slide here. The activities and technologies organizations employ to maximize the value of their information while minimizing associated risks and costs. That's not the only time I'll refer to and depend on information from the Information Governance Initiative. But that definition, interestingly, puts value first and risk and cost second, and gives us much of the ideas that we have here. It affects multiple disciplines, multiple people within a corporation. There's a range of interests who are affected by having too much data. The obvious ones, the ones that one easily thinks of, are legal and IT, but it goes further than that. If you take from the list that's on the screen there, business intelligence, there's an example of something positive, the information one needs to compete, to do better than one's rivals, to win business. Part of that lies within your own management, your own information stores. If you pick privacy, another example on that list, there's a subject which is often overlooked, but people forget this, that data in the EU and in many other jurisdictions indeed, if you have data that's got personally identifiable information in it, that information is supposed to be used only for the purpose for which it was collected and kept only for as long as it's needed for that purpose. Well, if you've no way of tracking what you've got, what you're keeping, what you should have got rid of, then how do you know what you've got that contains PII that you should have got rid of? All too often, that comes up as a problem in the middle of an e-discovery exercise. You get a demand or something from a regulator saying hand over all your data. And your data includes information that is not only full of personal data, but which you should have destroyed anyway. So there's another interest group within a company that has a reason for wanting to be able to find their way around the data they've got. And all this is not just a case for defensible deletion. Many people think that information governance and defensible deletion are two ways of saying the same thing. They're not. Defensible deletion is a sub-part of the wider subject of information governance. Categorization, a means of putting labels around classes of data, is another reason why one should control one's information, govern it as a matter of good business, and not just as a matter of buying off risk. Who's interested in this? Well, the people who have the problems are clearly interested in the broadest sense. They're of course not necessarily the same as the people who have the budget. You can always find budget, certainly in the US, but in most places elsewhere, for e-discovery demands. You can always find budget for reacting to a regulatory demand. How do you find it for these wider anticipatory things that we're talking about here? Beyond that, who's got the skills? Who can look into all those subdivisions that we looked at on the last slide? Who has the authority to tell people what they ought to be doing? And to carry messages up to the boardroom, where one hopes to find someone who's going to have a supervisory role here. What one needs really is to combine the interests of all these groups, as well as pooling their resources. And by resources, I mean not just their input into what the problems are, but perhaps their budgets as well. and as I've said, disclosure is a problem for not just for legal, not just for IT, but for all sorts of things. And as Jan has just said, that takes up resources. It takes up management resources. It takes up business development resources. It takes up HR resources. All sorts of hidden costs there are involved in reacting to problems, but also in what we're suggesting here, which is anticipating them. There's no escaping the fact that, that a company has got to apply resources in order to solve this problem. So how do you get support for that? Jan, you've got some views on
Yeah. No, this is where I would like to get in a little bit. At ZyLAB, we basically have three types of clients. We have the type of clients who will get you in trouble, which are all the regulators that use our technology. We have the clients that are in trouble, and we help them to answer the questions of the regulators. And then we have the clients who don't want to get in trouble, and that's, I think, where IG fits, information governance fits. Now, it's very hard to get support for an IG project. Typically, if you are in trouble, that's when it's very easy to get support and interest in information governance projects, but then often as soon as the regulator is gone or as soon as the problem is gone, then also the interest of spending any efforts, resources or money to IG is also gone. But what we've seen is that a really good way to start an IG project is to look at like other IT efforts. And one of the great examples we've seen is when, for instance, data centers are consolidated, server parks are consolidated. There's a migration to Microsoft Exchange or 365, or somebody's retiring Lotus Notes or Mimosa email archiving, or there's an acquisition and a merger activity, a reorganization. Those are great candidates to start IG projects. And then instead of just copying data from one location to the other, it makes much more sense to, at that moment, also use technology, such as we had at ZyLAB, to assess the content of these files. Look what's in there, not just by meta information and key fields, but also by the content, and then try to find out, okay, what can I keep, what can I remove, what's important, what's knowledge, what's important for the strategic interests of my company in the future. And that's the moment also when there is budget, and that's also a good moment to get support for an IG project. Do you agree with that, Chris?
I certainly do. One needs some sort of sparking point, and as you say, people tend to subside, and one can understand this, subside into with a sigh of relief when you finally seen off the regulator or the litigation's been settled or whatever it may be. A lot of clients and their law firms use that moment for a sort of regrouping and review. What went wrong? What could we have done differently? What contributed to the lawyer's bill, or the overall bill, that could have been dispensed with for next time? And the sort of subjects that we've just been talking about here, the ones that Jan has just mentioned, are an extension of the norm. Very often the lawyers have discussions that say, well, if you told us about this, or we did have 18 new custodians who turned up that we weren't expecting, or whatever. That's a sort of simple level of analyzing what went wrong. What we're talking about here is taking it to a rather different level, and one that one might well catch the ears of the right people for at the same time as the bill's going in for dealing with the last problem.
Yeah. No, and then I've also seen it, Chris, that, well, people don't even do that. You know, after a case and the case is over, you know, they don't want to hear anything about it anymore. And so it would be great if everybody would actually do that. We actually would have like a post-mortem kind of conference after a case.
I think quite a lot of law firms like that. I do remember a conversation with a banking executive at one point where he said, yes, he could see that was the ideal, that's what they ought to do. But frankly, they'd seen enough of the lawyers by the end of the action.
Yeah, no, that's what I mean. And then the lawyer, I can understand the lawyers want to do that. But I don't see a lot of corporates, you know, when it's over, they want to get rid of all the expensive advisors as soon as possible.
Yeah, well, my view is...
And basically, you know, wait for the next problem. Because
I see that as short-sighted, and I see that there are good reasons for wanting to build on the learning that one's the ones just painfully acquired. And the sort of things we're talking about here should be on the list.
Yeah.
What are the requirements? Well, some of these we've talked about. You need somebody within the company who's going to champion these ideas, somebody capable of pulling the different departments and the different interests together. Undoubtedly, you need senior support, and we're beginning to see new roles being created at board level with people who have job titles that reflect the growing interest in governing information, whether it's called information governance or not, is not really the point, that are aimed at grappling with this problem. One needs to identify hard-aged corporate benefits. We'll see in a minute some examples of some rather woolly expressions that people use, juxtaposed with some rather more hard-edged statements of what could be achieved, what has been achieved in some companies, not just avoiding risks, but also uncovering value. And then we get that big bugbear, the return on investment, the alleged demand that we must see a cash return for all the money that's being expended in governing the information. Barclay Blair of the Information Governance Initiative has a nice expression here, saying that ROI is often a retrospective justification for a decision already made, and I think that there's a lot in that. You don't want to undermine the importance of showing that money and the need to show that money and time on IG will improve the profit. But we do need to look at some of these components. What are the easy kills? What are we spending on collecting and sifting data for e-disclosure of stuff that never gets to review, for example? Or the example I gave earlier, of trying to identify personally identifiable information under pressure. What are we actually spending on that? That's part of the investment, as I see it, that one makes. If one can cut that cost, that should go into the calculation of what the return is on the spend on IG. Things like that are relatively easy to quantify. Rather harder, but no less important, are things like increasing your turnover and reducing your costs because you're turning work around faster and doing so without mistakes, because you're able to find material that your rivals may have, but you may have lost or forgotten that you've got. All these things contribute to value. They're incredibly difficult to put a price tag around and say that is a return on our investment. But it's fairly obvious to anybody as a matter of their daily experience that time and therefore money and commercial advantage is being wasted while you're looking for things. Any of us might ask at the end of the day, how much time did you waste looking for things? And it's painful. I heard somebody at a conference recently who'd been through this, who was a staff member who was on the receiving end of a demand for information governance and defensible deletion. And she said it was painful. We weren't given extra resources for it. It was a task that was added to our day job. But when it was over, we could see why. We could see clear benefits in terms of our own working day. So not just for benefits for the company, but benefits for the staff of having a better ordered body of information to work from. One needs some case studies if one's trying to promote these ideas within a company, and Jan is going to give us some of those shortly.
Yep.
You need a program, and all these things, the 5 points I set out here, are very easy to set out in these rather airily broad ways in which I've set it out. But we've only got an hour, and every company is different anyway. What does one need to do? One needs to set out what you're aiming to achieve. What is the purpose of this exercise? How are we going to do it? Who's going to do it? What tools, what software tools are we going to use to implement these plans? How are we going to encourage people, tell them what we're doing and why we're doing it? How are we going to train them? We might start by cleaning up remediation, which the IGI defines as cleaning up the past. How are we going to plan to improve it continuously afterwards, to audit what we've done and adjust? All these things are part of a project, and not necessarily a project that people see as I put it earlier, as part of the day job, something that's added to what they've got to do anyway. So one needs to be able to articulate the benefits of doing it, to articulate also what you're expecting to get out of it, what the deliverables are, to prioritize the problems, perhaps send out, and I was talking to somebody about this yesterday, sending out an email to all staff saying, tell us what you find difficult about working here. What's causing you grief? What's causing the company expense? Where might we make savings? What are the easy kills? Where will we get the most return for the least work? And also what's keeping you awake? Where does the risk lie? As well as what are the objectives? You get a good example of this from watching our beloved UK government at the moment, where the departments are all trying to meet budget cuts. So they're not trying to do anything positive, they're simply trying to cut costs. And they always seem to ask simply, what service can we cut? Or who can we sack? And we never seem to see the question, how can we work better? How can we get more useful hours out of the staff? How can we get more value from the resources that we've got? And it seems to me that a large number of organizations seem to adopt much the same approach, instead of approaching it by how can we get better value out of the material that we've got. Some examples, Jan's already given us some, of places where one can see money dribbling out through the door, racing out through the door, which one might be able to stem. You have, to come back to my very first example, you've got the lawyers and the regulators who are continually asking urgently for documents, which you're spending a fortune trying to find. Quantify that, and you're well on the way to establishing a cash value in reducing the pile. You have, and again, Jan referred to this, you've got the end of life of an archive system or of something that has been holding data. A move to the cloud, just to pick the whole lot up and shove it somewhere else, doesn't seem to make an awful lot of sense. That's a good moment, particularly whilst there's budget around for the move, as Jan put it, to deal with governing it, to deleting the stuff you don't need, to categorizing the stuff that's left, and to planning how you're going to do it better in the future. Don't misunderstand me to think that any of this is trivial or easy, by the way. It isn't. But there's big prizes to be won if one can achieve it. Companies who have policies and can't comply with them for data retention or for the destruction of data, or who don't have policies at all. There's all sorts of reasons for doing that, and one might contemplate making that part of a much wider program of information governance in stages, not boiling the ocean all in one go, but picking off, as I said earlier, the things that yield higher value for the smallest amount of input. Why might one do this? Well, you might be losing pitches to better informed rivals. You might be losing staff, indeed, to people who find that a rival employer has a better organized system, that offers a better way of working life. All these things become perhaps underestimated components of the reasons for moving towards information governance. And a longer time to deliverables, as I put it here, a longer gap between the inception of a project and the moment where you can sign it off and bill it. In many cases, not in all, but in many cases, can depend in part on how quickly you can find the information that you've got. Here are a couple of examples of some wording that one might be able to get out of such a project, and I owe these both to Barclay Blair of the Information Governance Initiative. Woolly expressions like, IG helped us to comply with laws and regulations for our information. Well, that's not very persuasive. But if you can say, information governance helped our clinical trials managers to reduce errors and produce better data, reducing our time to market. Well, that's good stuff. That's something meaningful to report to the board and for the board to report to shareholders. Another one there. IG helped our company manage its information better. Well, so what? One might be able to say, if one does it properly, that IG helped our project managers to close construction projects faster, so completion funds were released a year or a year and a half earlier. Again, something valuable to report to the board. And these are all ambitions that one might be able to work towards if you start picking off the pieces in the way we've suggested here. I'm going to pass it to you, Jan, now to put some flesh on all that and talk about how in practical terms one might deal with these things.
Yeah, thank you very, very much, Chris. Yes, because what we see happening in the market is more and more interest from the traditional e-discovery approach, like incident-driven, reactive approach, to more like the beginning of interest in intelligent information governance. Like I said, we have 3 types of clients, and the last category are people that don't want to get in trouble, and more people do not want to get in trouble. We call this the end of e-discovery as we know it so far, and the beginning of intelligent information governance. Now, having said that, I want to first talk a little bit about e-discovery and file analysis and explain that this is actually much more than just Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, United States lawsuits. There's a lot of other different business processes where at a certain moment in time you also have to identify relevant information, collect it, process it, review it, anonymize it, and then disclose it to a third party. You see that a lot in HR, of course by regulatory inquiries and civil and criminal lawsuits, but also to protect intellectual property theft, privacy investigations, or prevention of privacy leakage or subject access requests. Of course, fraud, bribery, non-compliance, but also several public records requests, congressional or parliamentary inquiries, and certain law enforcement regulatory investigations, which we see in particular with the government. And this is not just an enterprise problem. This is definitely also a government problem. Now, having looked at these different processes, what exactly is IG? And IG is a little bit, information governance is a little bit a fake concept. So we've at ZyLAB tried to make it more concrete. And if you look at this graph on the left side, you see in red what's like the incident-driven e-discovery investigation, which is very clear. It's like you either have a Federal Rule Civil Procedure e-discovery request, meaning that you have to supply data under the EDRM model, or you're in a law enforcement or regulatory or internal investigation department and there's an incident, you have to investigate it, or you're in the government and very soon also in corporates all over Europe, you get a public records or personal information or Freedom of Information Act request. They're all incident-driven. You don't move until something actually happens. On the right side, the green box, we see that almost all information governance really starts with limiting or reducing the amount of data, structuring the unstructured, and understanding what you have. This is sometimes referred to as enterprise information archiving, records management. Instead of just copying data from old repositories to new, we try to promote something which we call intelligent data migrations, where you actually look at the content and you use automatic classification and text mining and content analytics to clean up these legacy data. Big benefit in this, not only do you have less data, you also pay less maintenance for legacy systems. You don't have to assign a lot of IT resources to these old legacy systems, so IT people can be relocated to other type of applications. There's data protection, privacy, IP protection, and file analysis for reviewing, auditing, and non-compliance monitoring. Now, all of this is information governance, but basically, most of the times it starts with proper archiving. Now, what I have here is a conceptual overview of the ZyLAB platform, where we show how from any type of data, regardless of whether this is Microsoft Exchange or SAP or any type of other repository, we can import, normalize, unpack. If you have like complex archives or there are zip files, we automatically unpack them, we transform them, we can full text index everything, we can enrich data, so we can use text mining and content analytics to find and add all kind of semantical information, which we can then again use for classification. Now, all of this is something we do over all of our applications, but it's very useful for e-discovery to prioritize your review. It's very useful for regulatory responses to actually answer questions from regulators, which are often very open questions like who knew what, when, and why. And it's very hard to use just basic search technology to answer these questions, because often you do not know exactly what to search for, and by using the technology as we supply it, we can actually automatically classify, organize, prioritize, and search, of course, also all this data. It's used for archiving, it's used for compliance monitoring, it's used for the government request investigations, and also for the big data cleans, structuring, and consolidation. Now, all of this, of course, by being privacy compliant, we have auto-redaction, deep search, flexible export, real-time monitoring, etc. Now, if you look more at the business value, what's the business value of doing this? Now, what we see, for instance, in one of the challenges that almost all of our clients have is that they have a lot of knowledge workers. Knowledge workers use a lot of different communication means to be productive. And a lot of these, of course, you want to control as many of these communication means as possible, but there will always be communication means you don't control. On the other hand, there's a lot of unstructured data, which is all over the place. There's huge business value hidden in this information. Often this information is inaccessible or unstructured, and the more unstructured data, the more noise data, the more irrelevant data you archive, the harder it will be to access your relevant stuff. There's a lot of legacy unstructured data, and one of the things, as Chris also said, if you're getting involved in e-discovery or regulatory inquiries, they don't care what type of data you have. You just have to investigate all of your data, regardless whether you could have cleaned it up or retained it in the past or not. So everything you have will virtually become part of a litigation, and all of them increase your cost and risk. Now, what we try to solve here is what we solve, or how we solve this is to provide a solution which allows your knowledge workers to use whatever modern communication tool they need in a very secure way, and to grow their business. It allows you to, if you want to, and of course you have to take care, do this in consideration with data privacy and compliance acts, you can monitor actively for potential compliance violations. And I think at the end of the day, this information governance, archiving, throwing away what you're allowed to throw away, really is the longer-term answer to the challenge of frequent litigation. And this is where this is where you need to go. Now, one of the good things is that companies that are disorganized, using this type of technology and that organize themselves, we see that these companies are also more productive. They're more competitive because they have better knowledge sharing. They can find their relevant information faster. They can grow their business faster by using all these tools that allow them to be productive. They avoid unexpected and harmful incidents. So they don't suffer that much from problems and incidents that harm their reputation and hurt directly or indirectly their top line. And of course, on the other hand, you save a lot of money by lowering risk and significantly reducing data volumes by organizing the unstructured and legacy information. Now, if you, let me take it to the next slide, there we go. Two cases here, two companies, one in Europe, one in a large company, well, both worldwide companies, one headquartered in Europe, one in the US. AkzoNobel, largest supplier of coatings worldwide. AkzoNobel has been a client of ours, I think, since 1994. We've helped them with many legal, knowledge management, archiving, and other solutions. And one of the projects we did with AkzoNobel is that after the acquisition of ICI in the UK, we helped them to consolidate all of the archives that were still in Lotus Notes from ICI into the AkzoNobel archives. This was a huge effort, and we used our technology to do an intelligent migration and convert all these documents into other archives, and it saved AkzoNobel tremendously on the legacy storage cost of Lotus Notes, but it also gave them access to a lot of hidden knowledge that was in these repositories. Another example is Campbell, where we recently assisted them with a larger data center and server consolidation process. Here too, instead of copying everything for all of the documents, we looked to help them to assess the content of the documents and then apply the proper retention requirements and proper retention policies and classify the data in the right locations and store them in the new repositories. Both cases, huge benefit in not only saving costs, but also in having much easier and better access to the data afterwards, allowing these companies to be more competitive. Now, we do need to clean up our data. I have two graphs here which show the effects of exponential growth. The light blue here is without cleanup, and the other one is with cleanup. And even if you throw away, like 50% of your data today, that will actually be an exponential component of saving in the future. And this is what a lot of people don't realize. There will still be exponential growth, but it will be much less aggressive and much less painful as it is if you don't clean up. And this is really, it's a storage which is a cost. It's also the software, the database licenses, it's your hosting fees that are costs, but all of those will be a fraction of your litigation cost and your cost of not being able to find what's relevant, which allows you to be a more competitive company. Here's another example. If you are archiving, and this is one of the reasons why ZyLAB is so popular these days for archiving solutions, there's a very high hidden cost of archiving. And the hidden cost is in the fact that more and more data has to be retained longer than the average life cycle of an electronic archiving system. There's a lot of systems out there that use a proprietary database internally, especially if they use single instance storage. One of the problems is that if the vendor decides no longer to support it, and we've seen this, for instance, with Mimosa, we've seen it with some older versions of EMC email extender, and also some other type of archives, then at a certain moment you are either have to do a very expensive migration, or you have a very potentially expensive vendor lock-in that you have no choice to buy whatever the vendor offers you at the price that they offer it. And what we have here, and this is actually from a white paper you can download from a website, is an overview of the average cost of migrating mailbox over a required retention period, given that you have a life cycle for technical products for instance, say 5 years. So suppose that your archive will work for 5 years or 7 years, and suppose that you have to keep your data like 15 years or 25 years, which is pretty normal these days in HR data or in real estate maintenance data. You have to do 3 migrations. Now, suppose that you have to do 3 migrations, and suppose that you have 20,000 mailboxes. Then there's a hidden cost in the future for you and your organization of, as you can see from the top graph, for $2 million. Now, this is what a lot of archiving vendors don't tell you, and this is why a lot of companies these days avoid this vendor lockup by using open, long-term, vendor-independent file formats such as XML and native, which is exactly what we do at ZyLAB. And the reason why we do this is that we have many other clients in the government, like the White House, the National Archives, who have approved our file format, but also the United Nations, that have very, very long retention periods. And it's these type of clients that we work for with a long time that more or less insisted that we would use open and sustainable file formats for archiving, which have an additional benefit because with our archiving tools, you don't need a database. So you don't need expensive database licenses. There's no database maintenance. You can just use cheap blade servers to archive all your data. And it's a very cost-effective method for archiving data that no longer changes. Now, one other additional final remark, how about search? I already mentioned it. We feel that search, the era that we could rely solely on search is over. Regardless of what you search for, there's just too much data. You just get too many files and answers back. So we need a different approach. And a lot of this data these days is generated by computers. If you send an email to 50 people, there's a PowerPoint which is suddenly copied over 50 different users. And it's impossible to manage or review data manually or control data manually because it's, at the end of the day, a fight of machines against men. So we need to use machines to fight whatever machines generate. And the best way to do that is to automatically enrich, classify, order, sort, prioritize data by using content analytics and text mining, which are basically big data analytics techniques that have been around for a long time and are very, very popular in intelligence and in law enforcement. They start beginning very popular in the legal industry with predictive coding, but we see these days that there's a much wider range of applications that they can be used for, because if you use these techniques, it's much easier to keep the global overview, to understand what you have, to find what matters most faster, and to take the right action. And by doing that in a platform such as ZyLAB, you can do it in a very productive but also in a legally defensible manner, because that's something which is very important in this whole business. Then whenever you decide to use technology, it is defensible, because the other party will probably always challenge the technology that you use, so you should be able to respond to that. And at the end of the day, you'll be a better company, you'll be more competitive, and you will be able to do things faster with less resources. And here for your next lunch, this is what text mining actually is all about, from unstructured to structured, and that's what we do in this type of field. What do you say, Chris? Do you agree?
Well, I say that diagram, the photographs you got there, is one of the best illustrations I've ever seen of data turned into something comprehensible. Putting things into places where you might expect to find them and seeing what the components are.
Yeah.
That's all very interesting. It's all useful. It's long-term stuff in one sense, that the ambitions that companies have when they'll be setting about doing this will stretch into the middle term. They're not by its nature, it's not necessarily something that's going to be achievable in the next quarter. That's not a reason for deferring it, however. The bills keep coming in every quarter. The bills for either the visible ones, like the discovery bills, or the lawyers' bills, or whatever, or those longer-term bills of that one may not see, but are there nevertheless, of time spent looking for stuff which is lost. That's accumulating on you quarter by quarter, and the time to start thinking about it, to start that exercise I suggested of asking around the staff and finding out what their problems are. Perhaps that's the biggest takeaway one can offer from something like this. What are the problems that you grapple with that get in the way of making this a competitive business? How can we do things better in a way that I've suggested that government departments tend not to? Ask oneself slightly harder questions than simply, who do we sack? And ask questions like, how do we get more quickly to the information that allows us to turn our time and our products into bills? And information governance has that very direct link, and all the components of information governance, because one must stress that it's a very broad topic that doesn't fit under any one neat little label. That has that very direct bearing on profitability, on both pushing up top lines and reducing the expenses line.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
ZyLAB's contact information is on the screen there. I'd like to suggest also that you have a look at the Information Governance Initiative website, which is easily described, iginitiative.com. ZyLAB, as I say, is a charter party of that. And keep in touch with it, because that site changes a lot as ideas develop. It's very much a body which collects ideas continuously from its members and from others, and regurgitates them in a proactive sort of way. We're done, I think. We're done. And
all I would like to add is that we have a lot of white papers on our website, also with very clear cost of ownership and ROI calculations and a lot of details from a lot of the things that we discussed here. And that's it for me. I would like to thank everybody for participating, and you too, Chris, for helping us out again in a great webinar. And I would like to thank all the participants.
Thank you for asking me, Jan.
Well, thank you so much to both of our presenters. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time and participation. This does conclude today's event. Thank you for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.